Hello. Good morning, Jane. I'm not doing what I did last week.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Johnston with the Bar Hill Group at RE/MAX Camosun. We're here with the Victoria Real Estate Show with...
Hi, everybody. It's Andrew Plank with the Vive Real Estate Group. I'm with LePage. We have a very special guest today.
Yes.
Ogmundson from BCREA, Chief Economist. And
yes, we're quite excited.
Yes. We've been backstage having a chat. We have a celebrity.
But first of all, how was your week?
My week was good. Yeah, I was away for the weekend. Been getting away for the weekend a fair bit lately, actually. I've got off in Vancouver for visiting some family and had a really, really wonderful time. And other than that, business has been pretty steady still, which is interesting. I feel like things are slowing. We had one property offer fall apart this week. We had some properties that are just not getting activity we were hoping for, but we also have active buyers coming online and, you know, things that are happening and new listings coming up. And so it's not the dead doldrums that we have experienced at some points in our career. It's also seasonal, right? But I always start to wonder when we have these high interest rates and everything, where people get nervous. You get nervous, Jane?
I get active when I get nervous. So I mean, I'm telling people to price sharply because I was at this talk with Brendon, not with him. I was listening to him. Anyway, he was talking about the interest rate potentially increasing. And so I was like, okay, people, we need to get ahead of the trend here. So we are pricing sharply. So we've listed a few properties lately and they've just sold right away. We're trying to just get her done.
Yep. Well, you have to, I mean, not exactly undercut the market, but you have to be really, really sharp with your pencil if you're going to sell in a market where things are a little bit unsteady, uneven, or uncertain.
Yeah, and even like I find in a market like this, you have to just look not only where things are in terms of the numbers, but where they're trending. So if they're trending, one property, I swear we listed at just $10,000 too high. And then all of a sudden, it took 3 weeks and then we got multiple offers. So it's weird. So if you like the property, just write the offer.
Sure enough. Yeah.
What's it called? Marry the property, date the rate.
Yeah. Okay.
The rate's going to come down, hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully. Although it might be going up. This is for bigger minds than us, but everybody seems to think it's going up for at least one more time.
Okay, so let's bring Brendon on and ask him about who he is. How did he become the chief economist for the BC Real Estate Association? How are you, Brendon?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Good. So,
Jane, you now have an echo.
I know, it's weird.
We were having troubles with my mic earlier, folks, and then now Jane is the one.
Okay, I'm going to go down.
My fault.
Brendon, what's your background like? How do you become the chief economist for the BC Real Estate Association?
I've been trying out this joke, and I think it's very age dependent and nerd dependent that you become a chief economist by finding another chief economist and cutting off his head, like the Highlander.
Highlander. Yeah,
it's such an old reference that I don't know if anyone actually gets it. No, I did not do that.
Brendon, I heard that they're doing a remake.
Are they? Well, it's about time. The people demand it. Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't get that reference, it's an old kind of bad movie
that you should watch.
With Sean Connery, right? Anyway, and Christopher Lambert. I wasted my entire youth on pop culture. Anyway, I became an economist the usual route. Went to grad school, worked in economic consulting for a while for a Big Four, and then joined BCREA in 2010. Under at that time, the chief economist was Cameron Meir, which some of your people might know. Great guy, absolutely fantastic mentor. Learned a lot from him. He retired in 2019, and that's when I took over, and I've been doing this ever since. So I was an economist under him that whole time, and then chief economist.
Retired, like how? Does he still have head on shoulders?
Yes, yeah, that's right. He does still have his head.
You're echoing a bit, Andrew. I don't know why. Maybe turn your volume down or something. Okay, so we're going to go through our stats, and I thought maybe you could just comment on what you think is happening in Victoria and how it relates to the whole of the province. Would that be okay?
Yeah, you bet. Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. All right, welcome everybody. We are at October 5th, and we're doing our monthly market update. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, why don't you tell us what's happening with the Bank of Canada interest rate?
Sure.
We've had a number of increases, and what do you think is going to happen on October 25th?
So I can tell you what markets think. So financial markets kind of bet on the direction of monetary policy, and you can kind of infer what the next movement that markets think is pretty volatile in how markets are thinking. So like right after August inflation data came out, the probability of a rate hike in by the end of this year jumped to 99%. So near certainty. Markets really didn't like that inflation data. Core inflation had ticked higher when we were expecting it to at least be flat. But since that probability has steadily fallen, so the initial overreaction, now probabilities are at a really like unhelpful 45% chance. So pretty good chance, but not a kind of majority. It really depends. We'll get jobs data tomorrow, I believe, for Canada. That will be pretty influential what the Bank of Canada does. If we have a really weak employment report, if the unemployment rate is rising or the economy loses jobs, that could be really influential on their decision. We'll get another inflation data report for September before the bank raises rates. So all eyes will be on that. I think that will be the most important sign for whether or not the Bank of Canada is going to raise rates or not. My bias is that they're probably going to go 25 basis points higher in October and then hold there for the next year. That's kind of where I'm at. I think that's the most likely scenario. I hope they don't. I hope that they hold. But I think it's very likely that rates go higher. Even if they don't, the impact of just the expectations they might has really had a large impact on bond yields. So 5-year fixed mortgage rates are priced off of 5-year bond yields. Bond yields have jumped. They were as high as 4.5%. That's the highest since 2007. That caused 5-year fixed rates to go above 6% on average. And fortunately, in the last couple of days, yields have come down to about 4.3. If we had sustained 4.5, I think we could have seen like a 6.25 mortgage rate. Fortunately, we're starting to see bond yields come down a bit. Hopefully, that means that we won't see any further increases on fixed rates by the banks, but sort of that change in expectations overall about how the Bank of Canada is going to act over the next year, it's really sent bond yields rising. So we've already had the increase in mortgage costs just from that change in expectations.
They've been very clear that they really want to, stem the inflation rates and are going to be, not afraid to put us into recession to do it. So.
Yeah,
and the economy's been extremely resilient. We still have an unemployment rate that's near its all-time low in Canada and in the province. We are starting to see some weaker data on economic growth and like GDP was negative in the second quarter. It's tracking flat so far in the third quarter. So we're perhaps starting to see some real weakness, but not a clear enough sign for the Bank of Canada to reverse course.
I have a question. Is the cost of carrying a mortgage incorporated into the inflation data report?
Yeah, so shelter in CPI is 29% of CPI, so it's the largest weight. That's split. About 2/3 of that is owned housing, and then within ownership housing, there's a whole bunch of different categories. Mortgage interest rate costs, I think, end up being something like 7% of CPI, so it's a pretty big weight. Consider there's thousands of different goods and services in that basket.
Isn't that like a feedback loop? If you're tracking CPI and you raise interest rates, it raises the cost of living, so it raises.
Yeah.
Yeah. So normally, what's also in shelter is what they call replacement cost of homes. It doesn't perfectly track home prices, but it's sort of supposed to capture the cost of building a home or the cost of replacing a home. And usually when rates are rising, that's falling, so it kind of offset. What the Bank of Canada targets, though, what they use as sort of guidance for inflation is two measures of core inflation. One's trim, so they remove the top 20 and bottom 20% of price movements. So right now, the mortgage costs part of inflation is rising by 30%. So it's being tossed out anyway of their core measures. And they use median, which sort of tracks like right in the middle kind of price increases. So the measures they look at most right now are throwing out the volatility in mortgage costs. If you take out mortgage costs, though, even still, I think last month, CPI minus or X mortgage cost was like still 3.5% or something. So there was a time when removing it made a big difference, and we were like under 2% on kind of trend inflation. We're just not there anymore.
Okay.
So I was listening to Benjamin Tall last week, and he was saying it takes 7 quarters basically for these announcements to sort of start having their effect. So I think we're going to be there pretty shortly anyway.
Yeah. So when macroeconomists, we have these models, and we do things like tell our computer central bank to raise rates by 100 basis points, and you can trace what should happen to the economy. And generally that the peak impact of a rate hike on inflation and growth happens somewhere between like 5 and 8 quarters. So if you think about like the 100 basis point rate hike the Bank of Canada did in July of 2022, that should really be having its peak impact sometime around now.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a lot of what we're seeing in the slowdown in GDP growth and some of the slowdown in inflation. It's just that, the amount of rate hikes they've already done, has had an effect on inflation for sure, along with, just supply chains healing and oil prices coming down and all of those sorts of things that were driving inflation to where they peaked. But it's just like whether or not we need to do even more work to go from like 3.5% to 2% is really the outstanding question.
I think it's like driving a tanker boat. They're so huge, so many tons, and you try to turn a little to the right, and it will take, quite a long time before you actually start to turn. And then if you've overcompensated, you don't know.
You don't know, right? And I think we're in that risk territory right now, where there's a potential that the last 2 hikes, and if they hike again, were too much, and we overcorrected too much. There is a huge accumulation of savings in the Canadian economy, but that'll be drawn down. If we get to a point where suddenly Canadian households find themselves they've spent a lot of these savings they accumulated during the pandemic, all of these costs are rising, and then we also start to see the impact of rate hikes on kind of the real economy, and employment starts to fall, and then you get into a really tough situation where people are losing their jobs and having to sell their homes. We're not there, but that risk is higher than it was.
Understood. Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you have data on the lengths of time that people took mortgages out for, like during COVID, and whether or not what percentage were fixed and what were variable?
During COVID, I believe it was very highly tilted towards variable. Normally, like if you look at the stock of overall mortgages, I think fixed is about 2/3 and variable is 1/3, I think is the way that goes. And then within variable, only about 10% of variable actually have a variable payment. So most variable mortgages are fixed payment, but you just, you guys know how it works. The change in you pay more interest than equity or principal. In the pandemic, I think it was like I can't remember. Bank of Canada has this data. I think it was like maybe had flipped like 2/3 variable, perhaps. I think it was very high on. Now of course nobody is taking out.
That makes a lot of sense, because of course the variable rates were so low. It just made sense to tie into those.
Exactly.
And nobody really anticipated this meteoric rise either. So that's kind of been. Do you find? Is there a chance that do we follow the states at all? Like, is there a chance we could go in a different direction than the states in terms of interest rates and stuff? Because it seems like we've both been going up over time? Is there?
Yeah,
No,
not generally. Business cycle, like the business cycle between the U.S. and Canada is very, very highly correlated because they're, of course, our largest trade partner, and a lot of our growth comes from exports. We can't get too far away from, say, if we set our overnight rate is much lower than the Fed funds rate. That would mean a depreciation in the Canadian dollar, which would mean import prices are a lot higher, and import prices are a big part of inflation. So you get this pass through. So you get this natural kind of equilibrium kind of effect where even if we set our rates too low, we would get some import inflation, and then rates would have to rise. So there's sort of this natural equilibrating kind of mechanism because our business cycles are so synced. There are times when we have like what we would call an idiosyncratic shock, like the oil prices crashing in 2015, where that didn't affect the United States economy the same way it affected like regional parts of Canada. So there are times when we have sort of temporary cycles out of sync, but normally they're very, very correlated.
But you know, the main difference is the length of the term of their mortgages is like 25 to 30 years. So they're, you know, some of them are in a 2% mortgage for the next 25 years. They're never going to move.
Yeah, they have a real, like, their lock-in effect is a lot different than ours. They have the same supply situation because if you're locked in at 2%, why would you move? Even if you wanted to move, you'd move, and then you're getting right now 30-year mortgage in the United States is 7.7%. So it's a big jump. So like you can kind of think about our qualifying rate is 8%. Their 30-year mortgage rate is 7.7. So we're pretty similar on where kind of mortgage credit's at. But yeah, obviously they have a system where you get a 30-year mortgage and then refinance like crazy when it makes sense. But yeah.
So what's going to happen in a year or two when people like me who have two fixed rate mortgages? I'm getting feedback. When I have two fixed rate mortgages and they're going to be all of a sudden coming due, and I'm going to be. What are you doing?
I wasn't going to say anything.
I'm talking out of the back of my head.
I thought it was like a Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, how Jimi Hendrix played guitar behind his head. I thought maybe that was like a mic.
Okay, so what do we do when all of a sudden all these people with these fixed rate mortgages are we going to see a lot of properties coming on the market?
That's a really good question. So the Bank of Canada estimates that the average household's payment is going to rise something like 20 to 40% when they reset. It really depends on economic conditions, and it depends on the state of rates at that time, right? So if in 2 years or 3 years when people are resetting, rates have come down, and I think that's what a lot of the Bank of Canada is kind of banking on, and lenders. It's a situation with variable rates is even more interesting, because if you have a variable rate right now, your amortization has gone from inbounds at 25 years to 100 years or something, right? So when you renew, you have to get back on side at regular amortization. So to do so, your payments either have to go up a lot, or you have to make a large lump sum payment. So difficult. Obviously, that's sort of a problem for 2 to 3 years from now, and we're hoping that rates will be lower and the economy will be in a better place. But it's certainly a risk for growth, and it's a risk for the market at that time. It's just sort of like a risk that's just sort of looming over the next 3 years.
And there are a lot of people who are. I mean, I've talked to people who are saying, my interest rate right now is really low, but I'm coming up on renewal, and I'm not ready for that hit. So maybe we should sell first.
Yeah. I hate to say this, but sort of the good part of the stress test, which of course was for a very long time very against, and parts of it still am, I guess. But these are borrowers that were stress tested at a very high rate. Yeah. So they should be able to absorb the extra payment because that's what they're stress tested at. So, for risk management purposes, they should be okay.
Yeah, there's absorb versus like being able to afford versus wanting to be able to afford.
Yeah.
When you have
it kind of takes you from having a little cushion in the bank to now you're not going out for dinner anymore.
Yeah, and then there's the silly question, well, should we sell and rent? Do we anticipate the market's going to go down in the future? Maybe there's a chance that we sell now and buy back later. I think there's a lot of processing going on in polls.
Yeah, I mean, I always sort of advise against any of kind of trying to time markets. I think it's just very difficult to do. Even now, I mean, if you had asked me a year ago, and I think I even had these sort of simulations in our models, but if you had said like we're going to have an 8% stress test rate, I would have probably thought that home prices in Victoria would be down 10 to 15% instead of the average price is still hovering around $1 million,
Exactly.
and isn't really that far from its peak. So this is what happens when you have so little supply in a market. Even with sales that are fairly mediocre, we're running around 20% below what's normal for the time of year. Even at that level of sales, we have prices that are extraordinarily resilient. They've basically been flat-ish since April.
Yep.
I can't imagine if we had, say rates came down 100 basis points in the next month, you would see prices absolutely flying because we would get a surge in sales like we saw in the spring.
Yep.
When the bank went off had its conditional pause on rates.
Yeah.
Yep. Sales went back to normal in like April and May. And then once the bank raised rates again in June and July, that's when we saw things really fall off. So it's entirely a rate dependent market. If we saw sales get even just back to average levels, prices would be growing pretty quickly because supply is just so low.
And you brought up supply, and maybe would you be able to talk to anything about any of the initiatives around supply going on in BC and what we might be looking at?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So the government announced it's sort of 10 communities where they would like to see supply increase significantly. 3 of those communities are in Victoria, the city of Victoria, Oak Bay, and Saanich. The targets are interesting. They're going to be a pretty significant stretch for some of those communities. So for Victoria, their target, it looks like it's about a 46% increase in completions in the next 5 years over and above what Victoria was able to complete in the previous 5 years, which is, a lot. But Victoria has been building a lot. So a lot of those units are in the pipeline now, and not all of them, but like there's, a decent amount of units under construction that will complete in the next 5 years. Oak Bay is a bit of a different story. Its target is about 240% higher than what they've built. They built nothing essentially in the past 5 years. And they're expected to build 660 units over the next 5 years, which not a huge number, but it's a lot bigger than what they built in the previous 5. And then Saanich is going to have to essentially double its previous 5 years, so up about 90% over its previous 5 years of completions. So those are pretty big stretch. That's a big stretch for a lot of those communities. The overall increase for the province, they're in their targets. They say it's a 38% increase in all of these communities over and above whatever their baseline was for the next 5 years. Vancouver, they've set the city of Vancouver very low. I don't know why. Its target should be much higher. Even in places like Abbotsford, their target's only about 35% higher than it was the last 5 years. That should probably be higher. It's really fast growing part of the province. So it's interesting. I don't think they're going to be able to hit these targets. If you kind of put them in the context of what the CMHC thinks we need to build, which is interesting. So the CMHC by the end of the decade, to get back to 2004 levels of affordability, which good luck, we would need to build, or I keep saying build, we need to finish. We need to complete 900,000 units in the province.
Wow.
Which is about 130,000 completions every year. The record we've ever done for a single year in BC is 42,000 units. And on average, we complete 30,000 units of housing a year in the province. So we'd have to quadruple or more our average levels of completions to hit that target. So obviously that's not going to happen. It's kind of in the realm of
we
fantasy.
need more materials. We need more skilled workers. We need people who are finding the land to develop, and we need the land to be developable. It's a lot going on there.
Yeah. I remember going last year to the real estate, whatever they call that day for realtors, and the cities were talking. Oak Bay was talking about the fact that I think they've actually had negative growth in population over the past few years. So relatively speaking, of the three that you mentioned, I mean, I think Victoria is on track to kind of increase the number of people in the city. Saanich has a plan with building in major corridors, but Oak Bay has no plan.
Right. Well, to me, you have negative population growth when you don't build any housing, because then no one can move there. Right. So like your cap on population growth is the number of dwellings you have available. If you have no available dwellings, no one's going to move to your city. Well,
they're going to have to start rezoning along their major streets. I think that's what they will,
for sure. And when you referred earlier to replacement costs on housing as well, and Oak Bay has a lot of older housing, and so not that it's derelict, most of it's well cared for, but it's a lot of older structures, and as they get sort of end of life, then if they're not getting there's that replacement, but then there's the actual rebuilding of higher density, and they don't feel getting there.
It may be a case of them starting to bring in laneway houses as well.
That's sort of the Vancouver model that I really don't like. It's like I keep comparing it to like a feudal system where you have like the lord of the manor, and then you have like the serfs in the basement and the laneway house, instead of just using the whole lot to build, row houses or duplexes or triplexes or whatever, where you can actually have individual ownership too. Like right now you can't own a laneway house, you can rent it. You can't own a basement suite. So if we're going to increase the housing stock in a more meaningful way, I think we just need to kind of quit with these restrictions on how much of the lot we can use. So Vancouver does this to themselves all the time, where they say, oh, you can put 4 units on this lot, but you can't change the FSR, so you can't change how much of the lot you use, which makes it very difficult to put, it's not economical. And I think Victoria maybe has some of this as well.
They did the same with the missing middle, and that was one of the things I did with developers. It's nice to be able to say we can put 4 units on here, but it doesn't allow us to really build anything.
Yeah, it doesn't pencil out, because the land is so, like the house that the single family home you're buying is so expensive that what you can put on it doesn't even make economic sense, especially in the conditions. So what you're saying too, like what you were saying before, we've kind of set these targets for a 5-year period where there are so many headwinds for construction, and targets are great, but the government can't build these homes. This is in Canada a trillions of dollar problem. The government's not going to fix this on their own. They can help provide subsidies and other policy, but the private sector is going to have to build, and they're only going to build if it makes economic sense and they can make money doing it.
Exactly.
Well, they need lower interest rates as well to do that.
Exactly. So some of that is the CMHC increased their cap on their mortgage bond program by about $20 billion, so they can offer lower cost loans to developers. So we're getting some good policy. They dropped the GST on rental construction, so that helps a bit. So we're doing kind of the right things in some ways. If we can achieve that 38% increase across the board in completions, we could slow the rate of growth in prices. So we put out a report this week that you can find on our website, where we looked at what Auckland, New Zealand did, because they did this mass upzoning in 2015. And everyone's sort of obsessed with Auckland now, because they were able to really ramp up construction compared to other cities in New Zealand. And rents basically were flat between 2016 and 2020 afterwards, whereas they went up like 25% in cities like Wellington. Mm-hmm. So if we can match that, we did all this modeling. In our models, it's also about a 38% increase in completions. If we could do that and we start now, we could start, affordability would get worse for the next few years because prices aren't really going lower and rates are high, and then would start to level off around 2028, and then even start to bend down as incomes catch up to price growth. The big problem in housing in general is an inability to match supply and demand quickly, and as a result, we've had prices that rise at 6.5% per year on average over the last 40 years, which means prices double every 10 years. So if we don't want a $2 million average price at the end, in 10 years, we need to slow price growth to something like 2 to 3%. Fine, if home prices double every 25 years, great, that's sustainable. They can't be doubling every 10 years. For affordability is just going to get absolutely destroyed. So I'm hopeful that these plans can work, but also this period in particular for building is going to be very, very difficult.
Is though, like, I know that model's true of the doubling every 10 years in Victoria, but that's not true all over BC, is it?
It's true for the average in BC. A lot of that is heavily weighted towards larger cities, so Victoria, Kelowna, Vancouver, of course. It's true in certain markets. It kind of got true, but really fast during the pandemic. So even if you look at it, I was doing a call with our Northern Real Estate Board yesterday, and I want to say it was a market like Smithers or something, where the average price went from $300,000 for sort of most of the teens, so up until about 2019, to $500,000. Not quite doubling, but like a pretty major jump for a market that I don't think many people think about. That's happened. That there's the pandemic, because it sort of created a kind of a flood of demand out to smaller market areas, made prices absolutely jump. So even a market like Chilliwack, where the average price was something like $500,000 for a while, at one point jumped to like $950 during the pandemic, and now it's going to trend around $750. So it's a big part of it was what happened during the pandemic. Prices are pretty sticky, so when they jump, they don't tend to come back down very much. So now we're kind of at a situation where there's really no refuge for affordability. It used to be like, things were a bit more affordable in the Okanagan or parts of the island, outside of Victoria. Those markets went up like 60% in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Now there's just not really a refuge. There's nowhere where you can go. Like I was on that call, and they were talking about these, small northern communities where prices are like, for a single family home are like $600,000 to $800,000. If you want
a $200,000 or $300,000 home on the island, you can go to some really small communities on the North Island, but they're going to be pretty bare bones homes as well.
Yeah, at the cost of few amenities and not really a lot of access to healthcare and that kind of thing. Like there's real trade-offs. Yeah.
We haven't done our stats. Are we going to?
I've been talking so much.
We were loving the talking. This is great, but I'm wondering if we should just jump into that. We're kind of running out of time.
Okay, do you want to start us off, Andrew?
Sure. So what we do every week is we look at what the last 7 days of new listings were, ending properties and so forth compared to the week before. So as of October 5th today, we had 241 new listings in the last week. 105 listings went pending. So we're just under 50. We're like maybe 40% there. Price decreases, a huge number of price decreases, 160. So like 3/4 of the properties, that ratio. Price increases back on market, nominal. 251 properties went were sold at the lawyers. Transactions happened. 88 properties expired, so we're seeing actually quite a few properties expiring as well. And when we look at the past week, those ratios, we can see an increase in price decreases. That makes sense. You can see a lot less expired, but that often happens where people line their listings up with the first of the month. So that expired number could be a bump from that. What are you guys seeing? What do you think of this? I know this is for you, Brendon, like small numbers, hard to make any kind of.
What I'm seeing is the price decreases says to me there's a lot of pressure from people to get their property sold before year end. we talk about this being sort of the second spring of the market here in Victoria. And when I'm looking at the list to sale ratio, I'm seeing like the new listing to pending, that there's pressure to get that pending number up from sellers. We're not seeing the 120% of March of last year.
Yeah. So what you're saying too is like if we didn't see these price decreases, then we'd see a lot less of the pendings.
Yeah.
I was on a call with Victoria Realtors yesterday. And what we've been hearing the last several months is the sort of the above, I think they said like 1.2 million is selling pretty well. And sort of the middle class part of the market is where things are really struggling. Are you seeing that as well?
That's funny.
I mean, the middle, just right in the middle, like from what I
sort of like the the really interest rate sensitive part of the market is struggling. So
yeah,
townhouses, but like the less interest rate sensitive because people are coming to the island with a lot of equity. Maybe they sold from somewhere else, or there's not interest rate sensitive. That part of the market is doing okay.
Before the pandemic, people used to look at Victoria as a place to go if they were moving from a big city, that they would save money coming here. I'm not finding that anymore. So our prices are very close to where like Toronto and Vancouver are now, comparatively speaking. But where I'm finding a struggle is in condos still. We had a rebound at the end of COVID at the end of 2 years, I would say we started to see a rebound. We saw a real move towards bigger houses, and it feels now that the bigger houses are kind of hanging around a bit.
Yeah. So Leo Speltholz does the House Hunt Victoria website, and he does a report every
he's great
month or so. And he just output one, and he was talking about that specifically and saying, that the action right now is in the townhouses and condos as they're kind of coming back after the pandemic. But it's kind of, my feeling is, and kind of what I read between the lines is, I think that's kind of reaching its level as well. It's not like they're not meteorically coming back up, but they did come back up, and that's where a lot of the activity is. But to your point about people coming from larger centers here, I think what I found too is, in those price points, people are still looking. It's condition is really important. And if you're coming from a larger center with some money, you're probably looking for something that's more turnkey. And I'm finding that any property, it used to be people were looking for a property they could flip. They could make money on the rising values, because if prices are going up at 6% every year, doubling every 10 years, there's room to make a profit. But there's been a lot of legislation and a lot of drive lately to cut that out as well, the anti-flipping tax and everything. So I think we've lost some of the market for the homes that are tired and need some help.
Yeah, and I just listed a property recently that was absolutely gorgeous, and it was 1,800 square feet, and 1,900 square feet, and basically it sold for about $1,000 square foot, for completely done on an acre. And then I've had condos for sale. And they're going for maybe $500 a square foot. So I've always like when I'm looking at the market, I'm looking at houses being up here. There's a relative price for the townhouses, and we always talk about the variability in the quality of townhouses here, because some are really crappy and some are excellent. And so the price, depending on what's selling, it's hard to see what the trend is. But condos, there was a move, of course, away from small condos during the pandemic and out of big buildings and into the country. And I'm finding now people don't want to go back to that.
To the condo.
Yeah.
There's affordability, and there's the fact that, I think that there is a market for that, but yeah, people are, it's hard to, you move into a larger space and you collect things, and then downsizing back is hard.
Yeah, the downsizing doesn't seem like a thing that a lot of people want to do. The same way that we thought there was going to be a great downsizing with aging, and it just doesn't seem to come true, right?
They're very resistant. Every time I talk to someone who's coming out of a 3,000-4,000 square foot home, which is huge and way bigger than a couple needs, in many cases,
it's one of those things that
trouble getting their head around downsizing to 2,000 square feet or 400 square feet, whatever it is. It's always too low.
I think in some ways it's like a grandparents effect, though. Like it's nice, like, oh, we go to grandma and grandpa's, they have a big yard, the kids can run around, that kind of, like, I think that's a big part of it if you live in the same place as your kids.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at October 3rd compared to last year or last month. Sorry, we have 493. I'm now echoing.
Yeah, it's your echo. I've tried muting it. Can you turn your volume down?
Okay. So we have 403 net unconditional sales for the month of September. That's compared to 410 in September 2022. I remember the previous year it was around 800. So we're definitely down since the pandemic, up since last year, which is nice. New listings at 1,297 for the month of September.
I think September 2022 was the worst month, second worst month in Victoria history. So up from there, it's like,
And that's just when they were starting to announce the interest rate hike. So that was starting to take effect.
So bragging that we're up from September of 2022 is no big deal.
Not, it's not. It's not. It was a very, very bad month in Victoria.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think when people look at these stats, if not looking at it from context or saying, oh, we're up, this is great, but no, we're actually down over last month. So,
and active listings, we're at 2699 for September compared to 2504. And when Andrew and I got into real estate in 2006, there were 3,400 listings. So we're still down, and the population's increased.
Yeah, we estimate that we need about 3,000 residential listings in Victoria to be a healthy, balanced market. If sales are average, we need about 3,000 active listings. We haven't been there since 2015. If you remember, at the lowest point, I think in 2021 or so, there were like 400 active listings in Victoria. I think it was the per capita the most undersupplied market in all of Canada.
But that was when it was the hottest as well, right? We were.
Oh yeah. But there was nothing. Like, there was no supply at all. I mean, 400 listings in a market. What is there? 300,000, 400,000 people in the CMA. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like 1,600 realtors or whatever it is.
Yeah, right. You guys have to go out with nunchucks and fight for those listings.
The only one.
Okay, so talking about over the past 2 years, we were under 1,200 2 years ago. We peaked last year in September at just over 2,200, and then we're slowly rising. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, we need listings badly. So this, obviously inventory is accumulating because sales are very slow, but it's still very, very low inventory.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, this is our listing to sales ratio, the line being sales and the bars being listings. And we can see our sales have been going down month over month for the last number of months, where our listings are actually coming up somewhat at least from August to September, which is seasonally expected to happen anyway as we move into our fall season. And you can watch this trend, as we say we see that this trend does follow a seasonal pattern of, really slow in December, ramping up. We can look at 2022. Almost, it's funny because it wasn't a typical year in 2022, but the trend follows a very typical pattern.
Yeah, Brendan, can you turn down your volume?
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Okay. Oh, now I can't hear you.
Yeah, now it's really low.
Yeah, but I don't hear that echo anymore.
Okay.
Was it me all along? I was the culprit all along.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So this is always an interesting chart. So sales to active listings ratios. We peaked in February 2022 of 120%. That's probably when we had like 400 listings. 400.
Oh, sorry. It's me. I keep clicking on it because I'm clicking on like the point there and I want to highlight it and it just moves the slide forward. So my apologies.
Okay, we see we entered into a balanced market, and as you were talking earlier, we headed back into a seller's market in the spring of earlier this year, just slightly, and I think we all felt it. We in the real estate industry, it's kind of like sitting on a pulse. So as the market's going up and down, we're going up and down with it, and it felt faster in the spring. It feels fast right now to me, but I don't know.
Okay.
We are definitely in a balanced market to me, it feels like. Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
So looking at the trend for single family home average prices, again, September 2021 prices were going up and they kept going up to a peak there in April of 2022. Then quite a drop through to July. And then it sort of steadily bounced around a little bit. And it's been slowly building itself back up. Peaked most recently again in June of 2023 here. And then it's been kind of on a slow down over the last couple of months. It's really hard to call that a trend over 2 months, but it's certainly been, it's no longer a meteoric rise. And it's definitely not hit a cliff. So.
Yes, we're looking at about 1.35, which is astounding to me. So
for an average house price in Greater Victoria, yeah.
Yeah, and what's funny is, you were saying that rarely do house prices go down, but we are finding there was a correction that happened last year, and the market was fairly steady. So it's just come up again since the spring and seems to have remained at this next new level.
Yeah, definitely off that peak, but pretty steady since.
Okay, so condo apartments. So this is 1 and 2 bedroom plus condos. 2 years ago, we were at 600. A year ago, we were just above that. So it again had corrected itself. We're seeing a little up and down here. And this really is dependent again on there's like release of new construction happening here. And I think it's pushing the prices up. So I always wonder when I look at this data, is this pending or is this actually like completed sale? And I think it's completed sale, which is why we see a little bit of a lag happening.
Right. So when we look at those earlier slides where we talked about the actual properties that sold versus the properties that went pending, there can be a lag of 2 weeks to 3 months on average that between those numbers. And so we could be looking at numbers that are actually a few months past when in terms of when the actual contract.
I believe all the MLS stats are coming after subjects are off, right? Mm-hmm. So they're, I guess that, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we were talking about in terms of the fluctuation of townhomes in Victoria. Yeah, so like we saw some higher end townhomes closing in places like downtown Victoria, which were about the $1,000 a square foot. And then right now I'm seeing some in Langford. So this is all of Greater Victoria, which are, $500,000, not the quality. So we're going to see great variability in here, and also the number of townhomes selling. So January of 2023, we were low, but that's reflective of what was happening in December, November sales. So I would say relatively steady this past year at around 800,000.
Yeah. How are you doing for time, Brendon? I think we're almost there, but you're good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I personally like this slide because it tells us a lot about the home price index. So I'll start off. Greater Victoria benchmark price in September 2023 is 1.169. That's up 0.8% over last month, where it was 1.178,400. And it's up over last year at 1.163,400. So that's pretty good. The core is where we're seeing the highest price at 1,312, and this is up down 0.9% from August 2023, where it's 1.323. and it is up 1% from last year, 1.299. The West Shore is where you're going to find your deal at $1,035,000. This is just down 1.3% from August of 2023, where it was $1,048,000, and up year over year, where it was $1,027,000. So that's basically even from last year. And in the peninsula, we've been seeing a big increase in popularity there for single family homes, especially on larger lots. To me, this seems a bit low because I know that there are a lot of higher end homes selling out there. 1.273 was the benchmark price for September. It was basically even with last month at 1.275, and year over year, it's up 2% from 1.247.
Okay, so and Brendon did mention that last year's numbers were nothing to get too excited about. We were at kind of the lowest we've seen in a long time. So what's interesting to me is the main difference between where we've gone from where we are this month versus where we were last month, and the fact that we've the main core for houses went down a little bit overall when you were just going through those. 1 month doesn't a trend make, but it's just interesting to see. Apartments in Victoria, the MLS housing benchmark price, 584,500 for September 2023. That's up 1.1% from last month, which was 578,200. It is up 0.4% from last year, which was 581,900. I'm just going to sort of have a scan. I mean, what's interesting here is the West Shore. Skip some of these just for time. But the West Shore, the benchmark price of 580,500, down 0.7% from last month, up 4.6% from last year. So we've seen down 4.6% from last year. We see quite a drop over last year. Apartments are not the best investment in the West Shore lately, I would say.
Even still, I mean, these numbers, even with like a 4% drop or close to 5% drop, like considering where rates are, it's kind of phenomenal that we haven't seen a larger decrease in prices.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Are you seeing, are these stats mirroring what's happening in Vancouver?
Vancouver prices in September, the average price was almost 1.3 million. I think its all-time peak was 1.35. So we're not that far from peak in the sort of real estate board of Greater Vancouver area, HPI too, and single family prices are like 2.2 million right now. They're actually up year over year. So most categories are up year over year in Vancouver, which is absolutely shocking. In the Fraser Valley, which includes like Surrey and Langley, which are part of Metro Vancouver, but not part of the real estate board of Greater Vancouver. So that's always a fun confusion. Prices they went up a lot during the pandemic, came down quite a bit after rates rose, and now they're kind of back up. So in that market, the average price, even for like the Fraser Valley, is over $1 million, and has sort of sustained that level. So we've seen a similar pattern where prices went up very fast, came down, now they're kind of back up since the start of the year, and then leveling off. So basically the same pattern. Each one of these charts down from peak, kind of a period where we were a bit flat, and then back up and flat.
Yeah,
it kind of repeats almost the only market I've seen this year that is just unambiguously down is Prince Rupert, for whatever reason. So
yeah.
Is that oil in there?
Yeah, it's like the oil and gas sector. I think maybe Fort St. John maybe was down too. Oil and gas getting kind of beaten up, and then in the Prince Rupert, the port strike, and I guess maybe I don't know if there were layoffs at the port, or because it's a big part of their economy, but it's
I think Prince Rupert, there was at some point they were increasing the port or building the port or whatever. There was a lot going on in the last. I think there was probably speculation even, or a lot of build up in the last.
That was in Kitimat too, where they're with the LNG, where they're like that market's been very volatile. Sort of like up, down. So yeah, those northern markets can there's a lot of volatility. They're small and they tend to be subject to like a lot of money coming in very quickly.
Do you find this? I was just having a conversation with a buyer yesterday, and we were talking about, and you were talking Souk earlier. How you visited in like Souk as an area. But one of the things we find is, Souk is one of the last proper places to go up in value when markets are rising for us locally, and the first to go down. And I find you kind of get this concentric ring of when the market rises, you get the core that goes up first, and then things kind of spill out over to the outlying areas. Do you? I mean, and I've even found that with Toronto, people coming from Toronto to Vancouver to Victoria to Johnson Valley.
Yeah.
Do you find that, or do you see that in the numbers? Or
yeah, no, 100%. It used to be sort of from Vancouver kind of spilling out. The only time it wasn't that way. So normally, if you like chart like price growth by distance to the city, the closer out of the city, the more prices kind of go up. During the pandemic, it flipped, which was the closer you were to the city, the more prices were falling and they were rising in outlying areas. So I'm putting a chart together that for the Lower Mainland. I'm sure it looked very similar for the island, where like places like Campbell River were up 60%, but Victoria was only up 20 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to thank you for coming. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and you're very engaging. So I appreciate it. So if people want to reach out to you, how do people get in touch with you?
I'm pretty easy to find. So you can read all of our stuff. We put out a lot of material. We're a 2-person department, but we put out a ton of material that you can all find on our website. We work so hard. We're always happy to do stuff like this. Happy to talk to offices as well. We do kind of virtual presentations, so we're happy to pop in and talk to people. So you can find me on the website. My contact information's on the screen. If you want to get a hold of me, always more than happy to talk to realtors. It's one of the more fun parts of my job.
Okay.
I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much, Brendon, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay. For those who are listening, you can reach him at bogmundson@bcrea.bc.ca. And you can reach him by phone at 604-742-2796.
If you call me, I will 100% not answer the phone. but yeah. I might return a call. I will almost always respond to emails and that kind of thing.
Okay.
I just hate talking on the
phone. Fair enough.
Andrew, how do people reach you?
That's a pro tip for anyone trying to get a hold of me. Do not call.
Yeah, do not call Brendon. Do call me. You can reach me at 250-360-6106. That's 250-360-6106. Or email me info@andrewplank.com. That's my name. .com. My name's not .com. I get Jane shaking her head. I know you guys are all shaking your head. Okay, andrewplank.com is the website, and check out the Instagram, the Instas at PlankAndrew, where there's pictures of my car, sometimes myself, and sometimes my reference. Thanks, folks.
You guys are like besties. So funny. And if you want to reach me, I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at RE/MAX Promotion. You can reach me at 250-744-0775. My email is briarhillgroup@gmail.com. And you can find information about me at briarhillgroup.com and the show at realestate.com. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at realtor_RE/MAX. Sorry for the feedback today.
Blame me. My fault.
Yeah.
Okay.
Feedback, folks. We do always want to hear from you, so please do send us messages. Give us your likes. Tell us what you thought. Want to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah, we'll see you next Thursday at 9:30. Take care,
everybody. Hey, Brendon.
Bye.